Hello, Tansei Anin. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Inquests into the 11 deaths on the James Smith Cree Nation and in Weldon, Saskatchewan have been tentatively set for January of 2024. Inquests were expected in the spring-summer of 2023, but in a press release, Chief Coroner Clive Wayhill said the investigation is complex and RCMP are still receiving new information. A separate inquest will be held for the death in custody of suspect Miles Sanderson. The Saskatchewan Coroner Service aims to establish the events leading up to the deaths, as well as find out the when, where, and how they died. In Labrador, the inquiry into Inuit youth in provincial care entered its third day, with elders testifying that after relocation, religion, and residential schools, everything changed. Angel Moore reports.
Sheheshe Innu leader Penetwe Antoine continued his testimony. He was sent to Mount Cashel Orphanage in Newfoundland when he was about 5 years old, punished for speaking his language.
That's what I call cruel in my lifetime. You don't see a person doing that to you, to other people like that. They don't do that. Because they were different brothers. The first thing I knew, they were Irish brothers from Ireland.
Antoine testified the Innu were promised houses in the community of Shesheshe if they did not go to the country.
Neither one of them had running water. Neither one of them had a bathroom.
Mahashu Innu leader Joaquim Nui also testified in the Innu language. He said traditions were lost, such as the shaking tent, a sacred ceremony to honor animals before a hunt.
There's no one here that is still practicing shaking tent. I think he said shaking tent died off when the priests came into the community, when they contacted the Innu people. What they're being told by a priest, this work that you're doing is devil's work. So that's when the Innu elders lost interest, what I've been told by a priest.
Nui testified how 5 children put into his care fared much better than in the system.
Those kids that were, under my care, he says, those kids were departed to their separate ways. And just said, when it comes to the kids that I had in care, they never lost their identity, their language, and their way of being. That's what you know.
Commissioner of the Inquiry, Anastasia QP, said the testimonies of elders are for gathering information.
What Elder Joachim said, that people were happy and people looked after their children. People provided for their children. And that's really important information. And this is, for this week, is the information we're looking for.
The inquiry is expected to continue for 18 months, with hearings in Sheheshi and Natwashish over the next few months. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, known as Halifax.
Thousands took to the streets of Vancouver at the 32nd annual Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls March. As APTN's Tina House reports, missing and murdered cases keep rising despite these marches and a national inquiry.
Indigenous women, I'm sick and tired. All the people today are sick and tired. It's not politically correct to say it, but if you want to get away with murder, you kill an Indian because we don't get justice. We need justice now!
As the only Indigenous person in the BC legislature, NDP Minister Melanie Mark could not hold back her anger and frustration as cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls continue to rise across Canada, despite a national inquiry. Close to 5,000 people made the somber walk, singing songs as they went and stopping in certain places along the route to place flowers where many women were found murdered. Sutlut's daughter, Cassandra Antone, is one of those cases. Antone was just 20 years old and the mother of a 5-month-old baby when her burnt remains were found in Richmond, BC in 1997.
I used to come down here and look for her on the downtown east side because I am a day school student and I didn't get to see my daughter heal. I healed, but I never got to see her heal. And our people need to heal. The only way we'll heal is in our custom and traditions, our language, and remembering who we are.
Melody Casella's late cousin, Cheryl Ann Joe, was the mother of 3 young boys when she was tragically murdered on the downtown east side in 1992. Her death inspired this march, now in its 32nd year.
We have the 231 calls for justice of the National Inquiry that have yet to be fully acknowledged by the federal government. And here we stand again with AFN to hold the government accountable in hopes that something will be done so there will be acknowledgement and something done about the systemic violence against Indigenous women and girls.
And Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations Vice Chief Ali Bear says the government has to do more.
We need funding that's specific to MMIWG 2S+, because we need prevention and we also need healing for our families. And we also need access to justice. Most of the time, you know, it's so confusing to navigate the legal system, to navigate the police, the investigators, to even try to get an interview with them.
And for Marlene Jack, whose sister Doreen, her husband Russell, and their 2 young boys disappeared without a trace in 1989. She says the police failed her and her family.
You know, they already told me I won't get justice for my family. I had, after we did our search in Stony Creek in 2019, after the search, a month later, the officer that did the investigation at that time phoned me and actually told me, you might as well just give up, don't bother the police anymore, don't look for them, because it's a lost cause right at this point with these so many years gone by.
You know, my daughter was stabbed multiple times in the stomach, guy bit off her ear, gave her a hairline fracture. They had to do a life-saving emergency and put her on life support. Was there justice for her? No. The guy got off scot-free. He didn't get charged for anything. When you talk about the roots of what our Indigenous women deal with, that's our reality.
Sheila Poorman's late daughter Chelsea went missing in 2020, and her remains were later found outside of an abandoned mansion on Vancouver's west side 2 years later.
We still don't have an answer as to what happened to her. So if anybody knows anything, I just ask them to, you know, call the Vancouver police and let them know. They could stay anonymous too.
And so for the last 32 years, this march and all the people here gathered today are demanding answers. What happened to so many of the murdered missing Indigenous women and girls across Canada? Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
The annual Child and Family Report Card found nearly 1 million children live in poverty in Canada, and 37% of those children are First Nations, the highest poverty rate in the country. A nonpartisan coalition of organizations called Campaign 2000 is the author of the report. They found 1 in 8 children live in poverty. Also among the findings, government economic relief during the first year of the pandemic led to a reduction in poverty. The director of Campaign 2000, Leila Sarangi, says the high number of First Nations children living in poverty reveals systemic racism, and that the economic relief numbers show government can be part of the solution.
We cannot go backwards. Poverty is a policy choice, and the federal government has the choice to build back better.
All right, time to step aside. We'll have more news when we come back. Welcome back to APTN National News. A month without alcohol. Many are taking up that challenge this winter, but for some, it's a daily battle. One that a Huron-Wendat woman took up a few years ago and is still fighting today. A story by Shushan Becon, read by Tom Fenario.
In life, there are many different kinds of battles.
Great job.
You might be battling an opponent, or you might be battling yourself.
C'est sûr que je vais chercher de l'adrénaline dans la boxe, c'est sûr.
Isabelle Gros-Louis has known some battles. Boxing is now part of her lifestyle. But that hasn't always been the case.
C'est vraiment différent dans le monde autochtone. La consommation, c'est pas mal vu. Souvent, tu penses que tout le monde consomme. Souvent, ton entourage consomme, la famille, les amis, tout ça. Puis tu grandis là-dedans en réalisant pas nécessairement que ça peut être un problème.
Smooth. C'est ça. Relax.
Gros-Louis says using alcohol and other substances were a part of her lifestyle until her 30s. For her, any reason was a good reason to party every weekend.
Moins vite.
Searching for that adrenaline.
Pas de jab, juste direct.
Fighting her demons.
À un moment donné, que plus ça allait, plus que ça augmentait. Plus que ça durait dans le temps. T'sais, entre une soirée puis 3 jours, bon, ben, tu sais, c'est ça. C'est venu à un moment donné un peu plus intense.
Un pas, juste glisser ton pied en avant, frapper ton jab.
Gros-Louis says that one day she became disgusted with getting high and drunk all the time. So she decided to stop. And another battle began.
Direct jab.
Her social life changed.
Au début, j'étais un petit peu dans l'abstinence sec, si on peut dire, et non dans la sérénité. Quand ça a toujours été ton mode de vie, c'est dur de trouver quelque chose qui te plaît. Tu sais comme pas tant que ça qu'est-ce que tu aimes faire. Fait que je me suis mis à aller dans le bois beaucoup. C'est sûr que j'ai fait des sweat lodge aussi. C'est sûr que... Puis là, à un moment donné, ben, j'ai trouvé la boxe.
Gros-Louis isn't the only one fighting this fight.
Nice. Merci beaucoup.
Picasso Mukash is Cree from Wapmakstu, near Hudson Bay, but has been living in Montreal for several years. At a young age, he chose to abstain from alcohol. However, this doesn't mean he's without temptation.
Il y a 5-6 ans, à Montréal, j'ai souffert une angoisse épouvantable. Ça m'a fait comprendre pourquoi des fois le monde boit ou prend de la drogue ou consomme. Puis je restais dans le village à côté de Radio-Canada, puis juste autour du coin, il y avait le SAQ. J'ai passé proche d'aller chercher quoi. Je voulais sentir quelque chose d'autre que de l'angoisse.
Last month, the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse and Addiction published a report emphasizing the health risks of alcohol. The report shows that more than 2 drinks per week raises the risk of cancer. A recent study by Harvard shows that 25% of Indigenous people in Canada suffer from addictions, while the number is 17% for the rest of Canada. Mukash feels that it's beneficial to inform people about the dangers of alcohol use, and that excessive drinking in Indigenous communities shouldn't be normalized.
Moi, je trouve ça très, très désagréable, mais je blâme pas le monde. Quand on commence à comprendre les écoles pensionnats, tout ce qui sort aujourd'hui dans la communauté, je comprends. Puis je vais pas juger personne.
Là, tu vas revenir avec ta marière.
As the mother of 2 boys, Gros-Louis took it upon herself to change her lifestyle. And as an added bonus, she's encouraged her son's healthy lifestyle. He now trains with her at the gym.
Mon garçon, il est ici. Il s'entraîne à la boxe, il s'entraîne aussi dans un gym. Puis je le vois qu'il va à l'école, il fait ce qu'il a à faire. Il n'y a aucun attrait pour aller faire le party. Puis ça, ben, pour moi, c'est un cadeau, c'est sûr.
A story by Shushan Becon, APTN National News, Wendake, Quebec.
An explosive report by the RCMP Civilian Review and Complaints Commission was shared with APTN this past week. It contained allegations that some Prince George RCMP members assaulted underage Indigenous sex trade workers. APTN senior online reporter Kathleen Martins joined Dennis Ward to discuss.
Kathleen, thanks for being with us. Can you tell us a bit about this report that brought up these old accusations?
For sure. Hi, Dennis. So it's the RCMP Civilian Review Complaints Commission. It received a complaint from a Mountie. He's now retired. And he was just fed up with waiting more than 5 years for the RCMP to respond and investigate his allegations. So he took it to this commission, which does investigations in the public interest involving the RCMP.
And so why did the senior officer complain?
He'd received information that up to 9 RCMP officers, including a provincial court judge who was later convicted, were sexually interfering, somehow involved, these are allegations, remember, with young girls, 13, 14 years old, on the streets of Prince George, BC. This was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. He received some information, including that there were some videotapes that may have incriminating information on them. And he right away contacted senior RCMP in E Division, that's RCMP headquarters in BC, and they assured him that they were going to look into it immediately.
And so then why did he have to go to this commission?
Well, practically speaking, that's why, because he went to RCMP and he said to me, I waited like year after year after year after year, and I didn't hear anything. And as part of filing a complaint to this commission, the RCMP are supposed to keep the complainant informed about what it's doing. And so he said it was only after that he filed with the Complaints Commission that he started to hear some information from the RCMP, but it took a lot of pushing on his behalf, plus going outside the RCMP to get any kind of action, as far as he knew, going on these allegations, which are really serious.
Well, and this area, of course, is along the Highway of Tears in northern BC. This is where RCMP are supposed to be investigating dozens of cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing for the RCMP. You know, you may recall, as our viewers will, that RCMP actually apologized for their handling of those cases at the National Inquiry into violence against Indigenous women and girls. So Brenda Lucky, the RCMP commissioner right now, she signed off on this report after satisfying herself that it had been investigated internally, these allegations, and there wasn't evidence, the report said, to charge these officers criminally, so it was dropped. She signed off on it and then sent it to this retired officer. His name is Gary Kerr, and he sat on it for about a year, and then he made it public to reporters.
So, Kathleen, what happens now?
Well, as you know, there's no statute of limitations on like a sexual assault in Canada. So there could still be some activity on this if those victims, who are probably in their 30s, maybe 40 now, come forward again. Otherwise, I'm going to keep writing about it. The Vancouver Sun, who broke the original story, is continuing to write about it. And that's all we can do, is keep it in the public eye as more and more First Nations and Indigenous groups become aware of it and start, I'm sure they'll start pressuring the RCMP for some kind of explanation.
And you can find those stories by Kathleen over on our website, aptnnews.ca. Kathleen, thanks for your work on this, and thanks for giving us an update.
Thanks for having me, Dennis.
And it was announced today that RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucky is retiring from her role. We'll have more on that for you tomorrow. All right, our photo of the day and weather are next. Welcome back to APTN National News. It's time now for our photo of the day. Today's photo comes from Irene Brent, who shared this picture of her and her love near Grand Prairie, Alberta. We asked for pictures of what and who you love for this week's In Focus, and you did not disappoint. Thank you for sharing, Irene. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We start on the East Coast, where there's that little bit of a snowstorm. 1 degree in St. John's and 12 in Halifax. -1 in Cartwright and 0 degrees in Happy Valley Coast Bay. -5 in Quebec City and +5 in Montreal. 3 degrees in Toronto and -8 in North Bay. -10 in Clear and Wawa and -15 in Sioux Lookout. -30 in Churchill and Clear and -16 in Norway House. -17 in Barons River and -15 in Winnipeg. 0 degrees in Swift Current and -4 in North Battleford. -3 in Snow and Buffalo Narrows and -19 in Stony Rapids. Heading west, 1 degree in Peace River and 2 degrees in Grand Prairie. 3 in Edmonton and 3 in Lethbridge. 6 degrees in Vancouver and 6 in Campbell River. 6 degrees in Sandspit and minus 14 in Fort Nelson. Minus 15 in Beaver Creek and minus 31 in Snow and Old Crow. Minus 30 in Norman Wells and minus 19 in Fort Simpson. Clear and minus 31 in Inuvik and minus 37 in Colville Lake. Minus 34 in Cambridge Bay and clear and minus 33 in Arviat. Minus 31 in Snow and Arctic Bay and minus 31 in clear in Iqaluit. Eden Robinson and Richard Van Camp are among the notable names from Canada's literary community who will read from their works tonight for Writers Read to Free Dawn Walker. The Saskatoon mother and author's trial begins tomorrow. The Okanese First Nation member was the subject of a massive search last summer when she and her 7-year-old son went missing. She is facing charges of parental abduction and using false ID to get into the United States. Duncan Mercurdy, Canada's former poet laureate, is also doing a reading.
That attitude is prevalent within those communities. And so I realized that the only ones that could help this young woman is our own people. And I'm talking about not just Indigenous people, but also the writers and the storytellers that actually have followed her work too.
He says too many Canadians don't care about what happens to Indigenous people, so he is going to try and change that. And this week on APTN in Focus, it was all about love, and we had so many amazing and heartwarming stories from our guests and you, the audience. Here's a bit of today's show.
Friends, and we were with other people as well that we remained close with as a group because we relied on one another. And the residential school is a place where you want to have close friendships that you can trust and have a confidant in, and that's what I became to love about him, is that he was still my friend and still is my best friend today.
What do you love about officiating weddings, Dot? Like, what is it about these that you just love doing?
Well,
so
I guess what I love about the weddings is the people. You know, I get attached to people, and I like to help them. Like, I usually end up, while the bride's getting ready, not allowed to see the groom. Well, I usually help the man settle down and calm down. And, you know, it's a happy occasion. Like yesterday, we had one in Bear Island. I went over on the ice road. They came and got me. We had the wedding in the band office. It was Valentine's Day.
We remind each other of both our gifts and all the ways that we are good in this world. And then we have to smarten one another up sometimes, you know, much like we would get it from a grandmother, you know, a grandmother saying, hey, that's enough, smarten up, you know. And so I think that that's one of the ways that we show love to one another, for sure.
The importance of how that actually creates a lot of balance within ourselves, but also those healthy relationships.
That's going to do it for our February 15th edition of APTN National News. If you want more information on any of our stories or missed any of our show tonight, our website, aptnnews.ca, has it covered. From all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have yourselves a great night and look after one another.